Hello, good day. Welcome to Social Legal Studies Association Virtual Conference 2021 at Cardiff University, Wales, United Kingdom. As part of the Environmental Law, Innovation, Technology and the Environment topic, I am going to present on the environmental governance strategy in regulating biosafety, a case study in Malaysia. My name is Nur Zohaida Osman. I'm currently working at Faculty of Sharia and Law, University Sains Islam Malaysia. It's in Nila, Negeri Sembilan, Malaysia. Previously, I obtained my PhD from Nottingham Law School, Nottingham Trent University in the UK. Going to summarize my abstract for the presentation. My paper examines the environmental strategy of governance in biosafety regulation as means to regulate the transboundary movement of living modified organisms that may have adverse effects on the human health and environment. The main international convention on this regulation is the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety to the Convention on Biological Diversity, stress the importance of the need to protect human health and environment from the adverse effects of modern biotechnological products. The scope for environmental biosafety regulation according to the Cartagena Protocol only limited to LMO or GMO. So what is being regulated is the scientific risk assessment and risk management coupled with socio-economic consideration. This is basically the coverage of environmental biosafety regulation. So when we are talking about environmental governance in biosafety has some approaches. One of the most important governance strategy in biosafety is command and control. Command and control is the most traditional and popular regulatory strategy and constitute the norms, rules, and regulations that are enforced by legal institutions and backed up by civil and criminal liabilities. As a command and control approach, the biosafety institution is backed up by fine and punishment for non-compliance with the law, and it is a common practice for national biosafety laws. Next, what is important with regard to biosafety governance? This study analyzed Cunningham's main regulatory framework on biotechnology. In analyzing the application of smart regulation shows considerable effects in environmental regulation, but is problematic in biotechnology and biosafety application. The instruments used in smart regulation and the broad range of stakeholders or actors in biosafety are the main concerns in the regulatory application. It's useful to look at this pyramid of smart regulation. Basically, the government is the regulator, the business is as self-regulator, and the third parties pursue public interest group. So, when government as a regulator, they can impose disqualifications, panel sanctions, notices, warnings, persuasion, education, and advice. Whereas business as self-regulator, they can also pursue disqualifications, sanctions, warning, guidance, education, and advice. Whereas third parties, they can also pursue dismissal, discipline, promotion, reviews, incentive, training, supervision, and also advice. The second approach in regulation is reflexive and meta-regulation. Meta-regulation is whereby the regulatory authority oversees a control or risk management system. The authority does not carry out the regulation directly, but it steers rather than rules. Whereas civil regulation is where organizations in society such as NGOs set the standard for business behavior that are set up by the NGOs and enterprises. They can choose either to follow the standard or not. Next is the license model. License model is whereby large business enterprises behave the way they do towards the environment and considers the normative. Large business enterprises. As for license model, large business enterprises behave the way they do towards the environment and considers the normative and policy implication of these behaviors. The three types of licenses are regulatory licenses, social licenses, and economic licenses. Cunningham's main regulatory framework on biotechnology, each framework has something to offer at making different contributions in accordance with the nature and context of different policy issues. However, Cunningham stressed the importance and relevance of direct state regulation in environmental new governance in biosafety. I look at the Malaysian legal and institutional aspect to study of Malaysian compliance toward its international regulation, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and its implementation on the national biosafety law. Malaysia is a country who is rich in its biodiversity. It's even called the mega biodiverse as 10th, 11 in the world. The agricultural main products such as palm oil and rubber generate the country's income. The innovation in the biotechnology aspect generate income for the country. These are some of the local policy or rules or regulations that are adopted at the domestic level in Malaysia between 2000 and 2015 as part of the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. The Biosafety Act 2007, Act 678, Guidelines of Institutional Biosafety Committee, Use of Living Modified Organism and Related Material 2007, National Biotechnology Policy 2005, other than the protection of new plant variety and all those regulations related to biodiversity. And in the recent years, there is Biosafety Approval and Notification Regulations 2010 and Food Regulation 1985, amended 2010 by Ministry of Health, that is to legislate on food labeling. And on the institutional aspect, this is basically the Malaysian Institutional Biosafety Framework. The minister in charge is the Minister of Natural Resources and Environment. And then the National Biosafety Board is chaired by the chairman, and he's also the secretary to the General Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. There are also National Biosafety Board members, and there's this post of Director General of Biosafety who heads the Department of Biosafety and with its division. Thus, this committee is established under the National Biosafety Board to approve of the LMO applications. And apart from that, there is also Genetic Modification Advisory Committee, GMAC, and its subcommittees who will be advised for the release of LMOs in Malaysia. My analysis found that the strategy of regulation in biosafety is primarily still of command and control approach. The primary legislation is Biosafety Act 2007, sets out what is permitted and illegal under the Act. It can impose fines up to RM 500,000 ringgit Malaysia and imprisonment. As for biosafety and smart regulation application, there are some elements of smart regulation there to educate and advise the public on safe handling of LMO, also other biosafety related parties and decision makers. This is an element of smart regulation. And the law and biosafety institutions instrument its range from one extreme to another, from education or advice to penal sanctions and no suitable in between, such as warnings or notices. Perhaps for a lesser risk of biosafety activity, for instance, LMO, these standard instruments such as warning notices are applicable rather than straight to impose sanctions, as this could be seen to restrict biotechnology research and development innovation. For instance, the institutional biosafety committee that did not comply with the documentation and record keeping requirement as required for release or import approval on terms and conditions imposed by the National Biosafety Board, this certificate should not be revoked straight away, but instead warnings and notices should be imposed to make things right. However, the biosafety standard procedures should not be compromised. Next is meta-regulation. In meta-regulation, the regulatory authority oversees the control or risk management rather than carries out regulation directly. The main ministry that has the power to appeal in approving LMO in Malaysia is the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, NRE. The National Biosafety Board, with the director of NRE as the head, decides upon receiving a risk assessment and management report from Genetic Modification Advisory Committee, GMAC. Next, for civil regulation, as for third parties, as biosafety actors, it can include the public, the interested groups. For the instruments, they can just only give advice and give some public participation. In light of the current Malaysia social, economical, and political position, there will be lesser role of civil regulations. The pressure and inputs from the public and non-governmental organization will only be able to create awareness, but not means for effective solutions, either through mainstream media or social media. As for licensing model, there is little practice of licensing model in Malaysia. However, the involvement of broader parties will enable further space for the inclusion of socio-economic factors in the biosafety regulatory field. So we have come to a conclusion. So basically, the biosafety regulation is balancing between economy, various stakeholders, and biodiversity protection, that is to protect the human health and the environment. Application of command and control is still the utmost importance. However, there are some elements of new governance strategies such as smart regulation, civil regulation, meta-regulation, that is tried to be imported into the Malaysian biosafety regulation due to the legal and institutional aspect of biosafety regulation in Malaysia. Perhaps I've given an overview of the Malaysian biosafety regulation in terms of the biosafety legal and institutional aspect, taking into account of the environmental style of governance that is trying to be imported into the biosafety regulation. There are some elements of new governance or smart regulation being applied in Malaysia with some consideration. I hope I've clarified the issues. That's all for today. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Bye from Malaysia.